mainstream in their parties. Stephen Kinnock was not among the 34 Labour politicians who signed a letter this week calling for continued single market membership, while the Conservative John Penrose is a born-again Brexiteer who told us in September that any attempt to undermine the Leave vote would be corrosive to public trust. So was John Penrose surprised that details about the negotiations have so far been scant?
Actually, no, I wasn't. I mean, I think that negotiations are inherently something where there's a bit of posturing up front, and there'll be all sorts of probably posturing and, dare I say, a bit of flouncing on all sides as well between now and over the next year and a half or 2 years. But no, I suspect we will continue to be a sort of slow developing picture which will gently get coloured in over a pretty long period of time.
Stephen Kinnock, that sounds like, I think that the idea of a picture being coloured in sounds quite nice and peaceful and tranquil.
No, Turner or Constable, wonderful rolling landscape. It's all going to be fine.
No, I wasn't quite saying that.
I think there's one of the contentions that people have had about the election is that it's kind of slightly put things back up into the air that we thought perhaps had been settled. Do you think the fact that Theresa May is now without an overall majority, has that changed where the argument is on Brexit?
Absolutely. It's difficult to imagine us going into these negotiations in a weaker position. We have an utterly discredited Prime Minister and government. It is a shambles. And I think many people in the European Union are looking at the UK and just thinking, what on earth is going on in your country? But we have to try to salvage what we can from this mess and make the best of it. But I think we have already seen how much weaker we are in terms of the dynamics.
Well, let me bring in John Penrose at that point, because Philip Hammond has been talking this week about a transitional deal. Do you think your party, and particularly the long-term Brexit supporting people, will find that acceptable?
I think providing a transitional deal isn't a code and an excuse for not actually leaving at all in the long term and sort of kicking the can down the road and never actually getting out the door. Providing it's not that, and it's a genuine, does what it says on the tin, and there's an end date to it, and we know that this is a process of us getting out through the door in some way, then I think people will be willing to accept that. But there will be some suspicion that it is some sort of code for not leaving. I don't think they are suspicious of Philip Hammond about that, but they are worried that there may be some people who are trying to turn it into that, and that will be concerning.
Stephen Kinnock, I'm sorry to bring this up when Labour is in its kind of post-electoral glow of having done better than it expected, but there isn't a huge amount of trust between the Parliamentary Labour Party, the bulk of it, and Jeremy Corbyn, your leader. Now, he is somebody who's voted against pretty much every European treaty that has been, as far as we know. I think he's somebody who is instinctively much more Eurosceptic than the party and also your members. Isn't there a difficulty with Labour going forward that your leader wants something quite different from what a lot of activists and the rest of his party wants?
I think we're all aligned around the view that Brexit has to be about jobs and growth and standards, both in terms of the environment and consumer standards and workers' rights. And we have to have an irreducible core of those rights and standards that we will not back down on. And I think that the Parliamentary Labour Party is absolutely united on that. I think that we do need to clarify our position as a party on this issue of what's in Article 50 negotiations, where a transition deal will be required, and then what the final state of our relationship with the European Union might be, which may not be until the late 2020s, because that has to be ratified by 38 EU parliaments, the final trade deal, free movement and customs unions issues. So I think we need to just get some clarity on those points, but on the fundamental principles of what sort of Brexit we want to have, what are the outcomes of Brexit we want to see, I think we're absolutely clear on that.
And finally, just to maybe we can settle this in this room right now, what is the shape of a Brexit deal that can get a Commons majority? John Penrose first.
Well, I was really reassured, although not terribly surprised, to hear what Stephen was saying about the irreducible core of things that the Labour Party are looking for. I think that is a core which the vast majority of the Conservative Party would sign up to too. I think there's a cross-party agreement. People might quibble over the details on things like workers' rights. I think there's a cross-party agreement on not wanting to dilute environmental standards. I think there's a cross-party agreement on wanting to use free trade to create more jobs. There's a lot of agreement between our parties on those core things.
Yes, I agree with that. I think that the big conversation that we need to have is about the process and the sequencing, and particularly around the transition deal. I really do think the transition deal is going to become pivotal because it's a pipe dream to think that we're going to get those really big issues resolved by March 2019. So I think that if we could, in my view, there's a clear chunk of the Conservative Parliamentary Party that will not sign up to the idea of a transition deal at all. They want us to crash out. They don't like any sort of EEA. They're convinced with their sort of Euro Brexit paranoia that it's just an excuse for just constantly being in the EEA.
Well, John Penrose,
They've
I
got
can
to get
see you
over that
shaking
and
your
find
head.
their
So do you
pragmatism.
disagree with that?
I do, if only because we were talking about this earlier on in the conversation, that I think that even the most ardent Brexiteers will be quite happy with a transition agreement, providing they can see that it is genuinely a transition agreement and not a code for not leaving after all.
John Penrose and Stephen Kinnock on the shape of a Brexit deal.